Welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, Student Edition. I am Jasmine Gracia, and I am a fellow from the Humanities Collaborative with UTEP and EPCC. Today, I am talking with Emilio Sánchez. Emilio was born in Morelia, Mexico, attended El Dorado High School from the EPCC Architecture School, the EPCC Architecture Program, graduated the Bachelor's in Architecture from Texas Tech University in 2019, worked for ArcFelly PLLC on Montana Avenue, and currently attends the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture as a graduate student pursuing a master's in architecture. He is a graduate research assistant and a father. He is most interested in user experience, equity, affordability, environmentalism, and all the architectural and non-architectural means by which all those can become a reality. Hi, Emilio. Okay, so the first question is, are there spaces that are more conducive to dialogue than others, and can you give me an example?
Yes. There's more spaces that are conducive to dialogue. I think I can think of when we think about dialogue in architecture, we can think of three types of dialogue. We can think of the dialogue that architects have between each other, so professional dialogue, and the way architects do this, like a painter would or a writer would, is, writer writes a book and then they have a dialogue with another writer, and a painter with a painting. Well, an architect has a dialogue with other architects with buildings. So that's one type of dialogue. And then the other type of dialogue is the construction plans that we give the contractors or the client. Those are a means of communication. So there are like letters. So that's a dialogue right there. That sometimes there's back and forth, but there's a lot of hierarchy there, so not much of a dialogue. And then when we think about spaces that are very good for dialogue, I can use examples from El Paso. You have the EPCC cafeteria, and then you have the San Jacinto Plaza downtown, and you could have a UTEP. There's a lot of spaces. So we can think about spaces that are good for dialogue at different scales, from the scale of the building and the city and the campus. And the thing that those spaces have in common is that they have a variety of programs. So at EPCC, you have the cafeteria, you have the bookstore, you have some rooms there, and it's also situated very centrally located. So it's between all the classes, people go through there. So you have a variety of program. It's centrally located, and the same with San Jacinto Plaza. You have a lot of shops, you have restaurants, you have museums, and it's also centrally located. It's very easy to get there. Same with UTEP. You have spaces that are between, they're between other spaces, and they have a variety of spaces around them. And they also are public, which means that even though you can buy something and be there, you don't have to buy anything to just be in that space. You don't have to pay to be in that space. So that does away with class barriers and economic barriers, and you have a richer dialogue. And then we can go into so that's just programmatic design. You could go into the construction of it, having surfaces that do not allow for echo and things like that, but that's another topic.
What are your style influences, like maybe perhaps eras or characters, and how do those influences dictate your approach to designing, and how much does your personal preference play a part in your designing process?
I like minimalism a lot. So I like minimalism, I like modernism, and that influences my design thinking a lot. I also like the current style right now is postmodernism, but that is so broad that doesn't mean anything. So I like those. There's a lot of things to improve on modernism. There's a lot of things to improve on minimalism, but that's what I consider that I like.
Do you, like maybe for example for the concepts that exist within like minimalism and stuff like that, how are those executed differently versus we kind of associate like minimalism with art and maybe like philosophy and stuff like that? How does that kind of translated in architecture? Like how does it manifest?
Yes. So you can also think of minimalism in two ways. You can think about it as, minimal, very affordable, very clean from aesthetics. And then you can also think about, I would say, aesthetic minimalism, in which you make something look minimal. So, for example, in most buildings, most rooms, you have a wall base between the floor and the wall, and so the floor base helps to hide the connection between the wall and the floor. So it's there for a reason. It's not ornamental. Now, if you want to do a minimal look in which the floor and the wall base join perfectly, it's very hard and it's very expensive. Another similar thing is when you have a restaurant or a place, and then you have the open ducts and you have the open lines. That looks, like they let it open to show the honesty of it. But if you've seen construction, you can just do very messy stuff and then cover it up. But if you're going to show it, you have the contractors have to do it very clean and clean it and paint it. So it's a lot harder to get that minimal look. So that translates into two types of minimalism, right? And so you have in philosophy, the minimalism of, not consumerism, not living with a lot of things. There's a few architects that do that. There's Lacatone Basal from France. They just won the Pritzker Prize, which is a Nobel Prize of architecture. And what they do is they get mass housing, which is very minimal. It's very affordable. It's the most affordable type of thing you can do. You have mass housing, and then very affordably they expand it to give a better quality of life for the residents with the minimum. You have Francis Carré. He also won the Pritzker Prize, and he's in Africa, and he also designs very beautiful things with rammed earth, with brick. Brick is very cheap. A lot of architecture in Mexico and Latin America is very cheap. It's brick, and you treat it with a lot of care, and it looks beautiful, and it's not that expensive. So you have those two types of minimalism, and that's how architects bring minimalism into their architecture. Then you have aesthetic minimalists like Mies van der Rohe, who does things to look minimal. You have the latest Pritzker Prize winner, Tadawando, who works with a lot of concrete. And so when we think about placed concrete, we think about it very rough, like in EPCC. That's placed concrete, casting placed concrete. It looks minimal. But Tadawando, what he does is that he puts so much work into the formwork to make the concrete that it just looks very smooth. The concrete is perfect to the touch. It has slanted walls, so it's very hard to make. It has a lot of work from the architect, from the contractors, from everybody, and then it creates a very special sensation, and it looks very minimal. Tadawando is the type of minimalist architecture you see in Pinterest and Instagram. It's very hard to get that. But they're very nice spaces. They're spaces that really strike you. I've been to a few of them, and you see them in the picture. It looks cool, but you enter them, and then what you feel there, it's just from another world. So architects do try to make the great architects try to make the user really feel something. So those are the two ways architects deal with minimalism.
Do you find it to be more like perhaps maybe aesthetics to be more inclined, whether it's the client like a preference, or the client asking for this preference, or like the architecture designing? Do you think that they kind of are more inclined to provide aesthetics in different rooms of a house, perhaps maybe, or like in the building? Like, is there like an aesthetic that precedes a typical room, if that makes sense?
Yes. There's this architect. His name is Rafael Moneo. He deals with he's Spanish. He deals with typology. So you have different types of typology. For example, in El Paso, you have the skyscraper typology. You have the single family home typology. You have the campus typology. You have the warehouse typology. And then when it comes to the house, yes, you have typology. American houses are very specific, and they're not so, the way American houses are, they're not so in other countries, and they were not that way forever. So the American single family house, the one you have in El Paso in suburbia, and all over the US, it's you have a dining room, a living room, and a kitchen, and there's no wall between them. And then you have restrooms and rooms that are closed off. That's the typology. That wasn't always the case. The first person that did that, or the one that made it famous, was Frank Lloyd Wright. He was the one that you previously had a room, a living room, a dining room separately, and the kitchen, and you couldn't see the kitchen. The kitchen was for, this, you couldn't see it because it was dirty. And so he was like, no, let's take it down these walls. And so he created the open floor plan. Architects have been doing that a lot. You have a big space, multiple program, and then, for example, the rooms, they are closed off, right? And then another interesting thing about houses is technology, and the architect Rainer Banham goes into this. So he says that American houses are just ACs, plumbing, and electricity, and then cardboard boxes, and just an envelope. And if you think about it, people think about rooms and walls. Well, he says, well, no, the American house is AC, electricity, plumbing, and just, thin partition walls that don't matter. And so American houses in the US are very AC controlled, electricity, so they're very technological. They are hermetically sealed. And that's not so in other countries. For Americans, it's very important where you put the restrooms, the kitchen, and the kitchen, because those are the ones that require plumbing. So American architects always try to save money everywhere. So if you put everything together, restrooms and kitchens together, you have the same plumbing wall, and everywhere else you don't have plumbing. So it's cheap, it's easy to build. So, for example, that's why you can make a bedroom, you can make it a living room, or you can make it an office. But you cannot make a bathroom a kitchen, or you can not make a kitchen an office, right? Because you have that stuff that you can't move, that are expensive to move. Now, going into, let's say, a designed house. Yeah, there's a lot of things that come into the design. Things such as lighting, things such as privacy, where you have your big windows, where you have your blinds, where the sun hits, and you have the greenhouse effect. And it's also, when you talk about the client and the architect, there's a lot of clients that really want something. And sometimes the client goes to the architect because he wants the architect. Sometimes the client goes to an architect because he wants something. And sometimes the client chooses an architect because he wants the type of thing the architect does.
So as an architect yourself, do you find yourself drawn to specific spaces, and how do you manage to manipulate that of which you dislike of the space? And does this occur because of your personal preference, or because of maybe you're more influenced by your field and the mathematics of it?
Yeah, I feel drawn to certain spaces. At the scale of the city, I just took a class with very nice urban designers, and so I learned a lot. But so at the scale of the city, I personally get drawn to places that, the arts district, museums, cafes. Then you have the nightlife district with restaurants and things to do at night, and just spaces that have a lot of people. And I talked about public spaces, places where you don't have to pay. That's always nice. I feel myself, I like doing sports, so I inclined to parks and things that have recs and stuff like that. So I get drawn to those places because of the program, independent of the aesthetics. But because I guess everybody likes spaces that have a lot of people, or maybe not, but a lot of people do. The people that are there probably like them. But there's certainly, aesthetically, there's definitely buildings that I don't like. And I like this question because it talks about it. This is the main point of where the architect and the client do not agree on a lot of things. So, for example, a lot of suburbia in El Paso is kind of mimics Italian architecture, or for example in the Far East, or you have in the East Side, you have prairie houses, and you have the brick, and you have the columns, and you have also neo-Spanish architecture. You have the, especially since we're so close to Mexico, and so to me it's a question about honesty of materials and the time. So there's been a huge debate across 100 years in the architecture field about this. You started with in the 1900s, you had neoclassical style in which everybody liked the Parthenon, and so they made buildings like looked at like the antique Greek. So that would be the U.S. Capitol, or that would be those columns. And there's a lot of houses like that in downtown Montana that were, Greek revival, all of that. And so there was an architect that was like, why are we doing this? Like, do we walk with Greek robes in the street? Like, why are we doing like Greek columns? He's like, no, take that away. We're doing away with aesthetics. We're doing clean walls. We're doing clean roofs. Clean windows because of the age of the machine and everything. And it was like that. So that became modernism. And you have, buildings like the Wells Fargo in downtown. That's a modernist building, very clean, very modern. And then at some point you had modernism for like 70 years all across the world, and everybody was like, I kind of want a Spanish fountain. I would like a column. I would like a gable roof. Why do I have to live in a shoebox? And so you have postmodernism, and then you have people like Venturi that was like, symbols matter. The gable. When you ask a child to draw a house, he draws, a square and a little gable roof, a triangle roof. That's the symbol of a house, and symbolism is important in architecture, and we have to rescue that. And so there's buildings that do that I don't like, and there's buildings that I do like. So I like Venturi also has a famous book of Las Vegas, Learning for Las Vegas. Las Vegas is like the complete opposite of honesty. Las Vegas is, is just lies. You have the Caesar's Palace, but that's not Greek. I mean, it's just the fake Eiffel Tower. That's so fake, but it's the extreme of symbolism, and the symbolism is important. It affects us. Me personally, I like buildings that are more honest, but sometimes clients want an Italian villa or a Swedish hut, in the middle of the hot desert. But to each their own. But that's my critique. But however it looks, as long as the program is fine and the building is fine and it's environmentally friendly, it's okay.
So when you design a space, I guess with that in mind, so when you do design a space, do you design it with the intent of it fostering dialogue, and what components are you implementing to ensure this?
I've worked at an office, and I've done a lot of details and things, not a lot of designing, but when I'm designing for school, I focus on the program first, but I do try to keep, one of those open public spaces for people to gather. So, also I was doing an urban design study in which I had to design the whole neighborhood. And so creating, things like, there's a lot of techniques to create a vibrant public space. My professors were from Gale. Gale is an internationally renowned firm about making really good spaces, like cities, and people hire them to make nice spaces where people go there and they spend money, but they also enjoy it, and it's famous and it's vibrant. So how do you create vibrancy? How do you, because you would think that vibrancy is kind of like organic, like you cannot design it, but you can design it. How do you design that? So you have things like I said, in El Paso downtown, like the stadium, there's a lot of opinions about development in downtown, but what it does is it brings people in, and then they disperse, and then they, after a baseball day game, they don't want to go home and cook, so they just go to the nearest restaurant. And so you have a lot of program, you have it very dense here, so you need people, you need density, you need a lot of people in a small place. So you need, you would go into, high density housing, restaurants and retail, side by side, a public space. You have other architects that designed the idea of the breadcrumb strategy. You get out of the baseball stadium, and then I think I've seen stickers, in the pavement that say, oh, you can go this way, and so you can follow them. They're not as effective as, for example, if you got out of the baseball and then you see the new children's museum that, by the way, is by Snohera, which is a world-renowned firm. I haven't gone, but I should go. And so you see that building, and then you walk there. And then when you get there, you see a sculpture over there, and so you walk there. So you direct people, and you try to bring them together into nice little dense streets. And a lot of encounters happen there. You run, you're there with your family, you're talking. You run into somebody. Universities are great for this. They bring a lot of same age people in doing the same thing. Very smart in a very small place. You're gonna have a lot of dialogue, and so yeah, I try to do that. And that's a whole thing of its own, a science, I guess. But yeah, there's ways to create these spaces for dialogue.
You've previously mentioned this, like how there's like different, architectural like aesthetics and influences that kind of prevail over one building versus like somewhere else, where it's going to be utilized differently somewhere else. Like you said, like the Las Vegas, like the Caesar Palace, where it's like, okay, like, so there are some buildings that are where the architecture is specifically designed to enhance conversations and productivity. How then can we use those principles to design other spaces that will have similar effects?
What a lot of urban designers do is, for example, you have spaces that have always been vibrant, like the Champs-Élysées in Paris, or the Paseo de la Castañeda in Madrid, or Barcelona. So you have spaces that are organically vibrant. And then, like in El Paso, the downtown was dead for a long time. There was nothing there because of many different things, reasons. But then I guess, people in the city government, I'm not sure who, somebody decided that it was a good idea to, create, Main Street, create the downtown. It's good for the economy, it's good for the people. People like that stuff. So there's a few things we can learn, a lot of strategies. I can go through them. One of them is like safety. Do you feel safe? Do you put lights? When you talk about architecture, if you're in a very vibrant space, you have to, when you design your building, if you create some of the most vibrant buildings, in my opinion, are mixed-use buildings. They would be buildings that have in the first floor, in a city setting like downtown El Paso, the first floor would be retail, a restaurant, a cafe, and then the stories above would be offices, right? So you have your office there, and then people that go to the office there, they go get lunch right below. So you have people there, and then that'd be like the new building downtown. I forget its name, but it has restaurants in the bottom and it has offices on the top. And then there's new high density development in downtown El Paso. There's not mixed use yet, but the next step after putting, you have retail, office, and then you'd have housing. So you have actual people living there, or a hotel or something. Another strategy for downtowns is that, the problem with, and they noticed this in Manhattan, you would have only offices and people would go there and they would stay there during the day and then they would all go home at night. So Manhattan would be very empty, very dangerous at night because nobody would be there. So what they started putting is for other reasons, but they put housing in there to have people there all the time. So in business district, you have people all the time there, and that helps the vibrancy. So an architect that designs a building that fosters dialogue with the city would create a mixed-use building that is inviting on the first floor, and then you have to control privacy. How can somebody that goes to the cafe not end up at a apartment level hallway, right? Living room wise, I always kind of miss that scale, the scale of the actual building. You need natural lighting. Natural lighting is always good. Low ceilings are better for intimate conversations. High ceilings are better for bigger groups. The dinner table is always good for dialogue. People like to dialogue while they're eating, so a nice dining space. And also, if you're inviting people to your house, you need a clear definition between public space where your guests are and your private space, the master bedroom, your children's bedroom. You don't want them to go there. So that all goes into the design of the building. There's been guest houses, stuff like that. Once I was in a house in which you had the living room and the dining room and the kitchen, and then on one side you had the parents' bedroom, and on the other side of the house you had the children's bedroom. So a completely separate program. So the architect gets to decide all that, and then when you have terrain, you get to decide what orientation they have. How does your house interact with your neighbors, right? Like do you want to put your room next to, I don't know, if your house is next to an office building, do you want your room to be next to the office, or do you put there the more public space, and then towards on the other house you put your bedroom? That goes into the designing of where everything is.
Thank you, Emilio.
Of course, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on this Student Edition episode of Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. Join us next time.